Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the July 11, 2023 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom, online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage, or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Next is roll call. Staff, will you please call roll?
Yeah, Commissioner Lehman?
Here.
Commissioner Simmons?
Here.
Commissioner Mayer, welcome back.
Here.
Commissioner Udowitz?
Present.
Vice Chair Tagney?
Here.
And Chair Davies.
Here. We're joined this evening by Community Development Department staff, Director David Loya and Senior Planner Dilo Freitas. Next, we will have oral communications. Next, we will have, public comment for oral communications. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. We have returned to regular meetings and will be opening public comment on each item individually. Please hold your comments regarding the Gateway Code, Gateway Area Plan, or general plan updates until the appropriate agenda item. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda today, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make oral communications on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen, or
Recording
by pressing
stopped.
*9 if you are calling in. For those on Zoom, when it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you. With that, I'd like to open public comment. During initial public comment, each speaker will have 2 minutes to comment during early oral communications and 3 minutes during tonight's business items. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
My name is Gil Friedman. I've been a resident of Arcata for over 30 years. I own property here, and I want to speak on the L Street project. All over the world, they try to take heavy trafficked areas and make them pedestrian free and make them parks. We are so fortunate that we have one that naturally developed on L Street. And it just doesn't mean L Street. If you go to the end of L Street, Samoa, jog to the right, cross the street, it leads to the ponds there. The Brackish Pond is one of the most beautiful places in Arcata, maybe in the world. And by putting that L Street thing in, you're going to cut the access there. I walk there many days in the week on that road. I also think that the L Street and K Street intersection is a total disaster. One-way streets just make for faster and faster travel. I live at the top of J. I cross H Street at 17th. If you do that in the morning around 8:30, it's like crossing a freeway. It's very, very dangerous. Finally, I just stopped it. I go to 16th Street where there's a stop sign. If you want to slow the traffic on K Street, all you have to do is put a couple more stop signs in. I was told that unless we did this, the state would intervene and they'd have their own plan. Well, I lived in San Francisco in the 60s, and they wanted to build 27 miles of expressways all over the city. And Embarcadero, they were going to rip out the Panhandle, and they said the same thing there, that if they didn't do it, the state would. And it turned out that all the progressive leaders, the city mayor, the Governor Brown, all were for their proposals. One guy, Butler, he refused to agree, and with neighborhood action, we stopped it. And I feel we should stop it. I think it's a disaster. You could see the work of the city planning by just those two huge flower pots they put on G Street, on H going down on 10th. Just making a traffic jam was not. I think the least that should be done is the people of Arcata should have a right to vote on the project. It's a very important thing, and it shouldn't be left to a few people deciding. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your comments. Just a reminder, this opening period for public comment is for items that are not on the agenda. Go ahead.
Good evening. A year and a half ago, I basically let you guys know about environmental justice and local planning, which is a requirement from the state of California. It basically also started out prior to that we have a large percentage of vehicles that come into the city of Arcata. They spend a lot of money to take their vehicles that are in compliance with the state standards for emissions and alter them. And you can go on the internet and see all the different devices that they put on, and some of them are called whistlers. I mean, they're very loud, obnoxious, you know, like an F-16 going by at different times of the night. But the Environmental Justice Initiative law goes beyond that. It has to do with, you know, this is, if you can't deal with this simple problem, which started in 2018, and unfortunately the city did not crack down on it. So what we got was, you know, more and more vehicles that, you know, got the okay that this is okay. But I did receive a letter from the Attorney General, an email last week regarding this initiative, and they are already taking, they're cracking down on cities that aren't complying with the Environmental Justice Initiative. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at that, because it seems like that was lacking, and I'm just really surprised that how progressive the city is, that they're not taking a look at how vehicles on these busy artery streets, and there's a number of them, that when H is one that I live on, that from these emissions from sound and also air quality. And this is really a pet project of the Attorney General. He's actually said that, I know with the housing crunch that we're having, that still is an important part of it, but the sound and the environmental justice is just as important.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening. I'm Fred Wise of Arcata1.com. First, I want to thank Commissioners Lehman and Yodowitz for your comments last 2 weeks ago. I felt you expressed a lot of clear thinking, and it was refreshing to see and hear. Second, I want to apologize to the entire Planning Commission. I have been focused in the last few months more about process and less about the actual general plan and gateway area plan. That's the result, I feel, that the process has been going downhill. Third, I think we have a potential ethics issue with one of the commissioners, Matt Simmons, and I think that needs to be addressed or educated. Next, last 2 weeks ago, the tabulation chart on the general plan updates had an incorrect formula. It resulted in the commissioners' wishes of Commissioners Tagney, Yodowitz, and Lehman to be disregarded. It wouldn't have made too much difference, but it was an unfortunate error on the spreadsheet. Further, in the past, when Commissioners Lehman and Figueroa were absent, their expressions were made clear to the director, and they were included in the discussion. 2 weeks ago, even though Commissioner Mayer had requested a 1-month extension on this recommendation, her requests were ignored. We have seen the former chair of the Planning Commission dismissed in her expressions. We've seen the current chair of the Transportation Safety Committee expressions dismissed, and now we've seen your expressions dismissed. As far as the tabulation error, I will include that in the email that you'll get shortly. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony DeLuca, and I've been living here in Humboldt County since I was 12. Went to Arcata High, and I'm currently living in Arcata. And I would like to talk about the Turner Housing Innovation Labs. I'm not going to get too into the detail. There's a basic point I'm making, is that the Turner Housing Innovation Labs is not local to Arcata, has not any reason to honor the culture or the general disposition of people who live in Arcata, and I think that speaks to an issue that is about democracy and government, that we are supposed to be having a representative democracy as far as I understand, and to work with a nonprofit that is funded by a conglomerate of large corporate organizations that historically have not been welcome in Arcata. And for the most part, I think a lot of people in Arcata have a local conscious, the food is fresher if you buy it from a local farm. The money that you spend at a local business circulates into all of our pockets. And so to work with someone like Turner Housing Innovation Labs not only funnels tax money that these grants are intended to stimulate our economy into these organizations, or at least the nonprofit that's doing the work that these organizations are supporting, it also speaks to a disconnect with the Arcata public. And I think that a lot of people feel that their comments are being ignored or dismissed, both professional and just ordinary people like myself. And I think that that is one specific example of the Turner Housing Innovation Labs that shows a change in the culture and ideology that is mostly in the government here and not in the public. And I think that it's in Arcata's best interest, and Cal Poly and the state, to market a different kind of life here in Arcata and Humboldt to potential students or travelers. If we make it like everywhere else, then it's bland and not good. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Lisa Pelletier. I'm just here to, I would like to echo Anthony's comments about the Turner Innovation Labs. I don't feel that when you go through that process with an out of area organization that doesn't have the community's interests at heart, you are undercutting the community. And there have been so many stages in this process where I feel like our voices have been shut down or not heard. So I'm speaking out about that tonight. I also want to show my support for the L Street Linear Park. I feel like 950 people have signed a petition, and yet you made the LK couplet a goal. And so that's another example where the community's voice is not being heard. And so I guess that's my main comment. I just feel like you should do a better job of listening and hearing our voices and, enacting the will of the people in this community, and not some outside, agency that doesn't really care for our community the way we do. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And just one more reminder, gateway comments would be
How about we have growth in Arcata? I'm sorry, got hit in the head. So, I had a point. I do want to speak to growth in Arcata. Why aren't we growing? This is a great city. And I don't know why we're not growing. I'm going to sit down.
Okay, do we have anyone else here in the public that would like to make comments on items not on this evening's agenda? Can you see if there's anyone online, Dilo? Maybe let's just take a pause for a sec.
If there's anyone online who would like to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand. If not, we're going to take just a quick pause. Thank you.
No commenters online. Okay, appreciate everyone's patience. We're moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the commission and are enacted in one motion. Commissioners or members of the public can request that an item be removed for separate discussion. Do planning commissioners have comments on the minutes, or is there a motion to adopt? I know Joel had a question about those minutes for staff.
Yeah, my comment is under, for the minutes of June 27, under Roman numeral 4, the second sentence says, he, referring to Mr. Loya, stated there will be one special meeting per month in August, and the second meeting will be canceled and scheduled as a joint study. And should that be one regular meeting per month and the second meeting?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I'll move to correct the minutes to change the word special to regular.
And does that motion include a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
It does.
We have a motion to, go ahead, Peter.
I just have a question on the older minutes. There's a triple asterisk by my name and no explanation. Do you know why that's true?
That means you're super special. The triple asterisk has to do with notes at the very end of the agenda,
But there
or
aren't.
into the minutes, rather, where it says corrected on motion by Commissioner Tagney, second by Commissioner Simmons, and by unanimous vote to add the following under oral communications. 4 members of the public spoke under oral communications on matters not on the agenda. And it just happens to be that it's by your name. It's not, it's a little odd that it's put there, but it doesn't reflect anything about you personally.
Okay.
Okay, we have
You're looking for a second?
yes, I am.
I'll second.
We have a motion with a change and a second. All in favor?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct this. This is just a minor point, but that's what the second two asterisks means. And I think I think that what happened was that the minutes previously stated Simmons. Or Commissioner Lehman is being present, and he's actually absent. I'd have to look back in the record why that is. So if you want to hold off on approving those, you can. I'm not seeing the triple asterisks on this set of minutes.
Yeah,
But I believe there was something where you were listed as being present and taking action, but you were actually absent.
I think I was listed twice, both as myself and as Peter.
Correct, but there's no, what I would say is hold off on adopting these because there should be an explanation. Unless I'm missing it, I'm just not seeing that there is an explanation for what that. Yeah, it looks like it got cut off from the minutes.
How about the March 14th minutes? Should we?
Those are the ones I'm looking at, yeah.
I thought it was June 27th we can go with.
Yeah, those are,
Okay.
Yeah, those are the June 27th.
The June 27th can be adopted, so hold off on the March 14th.
Okay, so you'll bring the March 14th minutes back to us with some adjustments. And Joel's proposal was for the June 27th minutes anyways, as amended. Right? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I abstain, and I'd be interested in that point of order.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who did the second. Okay. I'd like to. 2, 3, 4.
Okay, I'll allow.
Be brief. This is the third time that this has come back here. At the March 27th meeting, the chair, Scott Davies, said what needed to be changed. He was clear, and this was not done. I reminded the commission at the April 11th meeting that what the chair had requested was not done, and here we are, and there will be a fourth time. This is a waste of time of the commission. I resent that. I also believe that counter to the community director's notion that Peter Lehman's comments must be included in these minutes. He says that they were part of the public record. They are not part of the public record. By Brown Act law, they were required to have been given to the people online at the time, and they were not. As a simple solution, they can be included in the minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
Do you want to take any, are there any other public comment?
Does anyone else have concerns unexpressed yet about the June 27th meeting or the minutes thereof? Okay. Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on. We have 2 business items today. The first item is to consider administrative actions, including electing chair, vice chair, and considering special meeting times. Can we begin with a staff report?
Yeah, I'll keep it super brief here. The first meeting in July is the time to elect chair and vice chair. That's done by voice vote. It can be done in one motion for both positions if you wish. We thought it would be expedient to also consider the meetings that should be canceled or may be canceled coming towards the end of the year, including those meetings that are scheduled for study sessions with the city council, as well as meetings that fall on holiday weeks. So those are the items before you, and I'd love to take a moment to discuss them.
Does anyone have questions for staff before we take public comment? Questions, comments? Okay. Next, we will have public comment. Each speaker wishing to speak on this agenda item will have 3 minutes. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please? If anyone would like to speak to this item.
We have
Not
none
seeing
online.
any. Do we have none online? Okay. Go ahead, Peter.
I'd like to nominate Chairman Davies and Vice Chair Tagney to continue for another year.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Our next agenda item this evening is to consider a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan updates. Can we begin with a staff report, please?
Excuse me, I'm not sure that we finished with that agenda
Oh,
item.
you're right. I made a mistake. Thank you for that, Judith. We did not discuss addressing the special meeting times and cancellations. David?
Yeah, I'm sorry, trying to sort out a technical detail. What was the question?
No problem. I moved on prematurely after a vote on chair and vice chair, but we neglected to resolve the question stated by staff regarding special meeting times and the necessity for special for meeting cancellations due to holiday conflicts.
Yep.
So can you give us some dates or put that into something that we can make a motion and move on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the special meeting dates for Planning Commission and City Council meetings are the August 22nd, September 26th, and October 24th. So you should move to cancel those meetings. And then if you wish, there's a meeting in November and December, second meeting dates that are close to holidays. One of them actually falls in the week of the holiday.
Yeah, the December meeting is the 26th, the day after Christmas, which City Hall would be closed anyway. I think the Thanksgiving date, I believe, is the week before.
Week before.
So we could still keep it. That one is the one that we might want to discuss whether or not to keep on the agenda or to cancel based on whatever plans the commission has for that
And what's
holiday.
the actual date of that November meeting?
It is November 21st, and so the Thanksgiving is the week after.
So
I'm sorry, it's November 28th. November 28th. That's the meeting day? Yeah. Yeah.
So we surely need to cancel 8/27, 9/26, and 10/24 because we're having joint meetings with the city council.
Right.
Excuse me, I don't believe that we surely need to cancel those meetings. May I speak?
Please do.
Those are our regularly scheduled meeting times. At the study sessions with the city council, we have no formal opportunity for public comment. In fact, there doesn't need to be public comment at those meetings at all. I think that we can probably hold a formal planning commission meeting on those dates and follow it with a study session with the city council. That will provide the public with opportunities to comment and will not shut them out of those meetings or discussions, and would still allow the city council and the planning commission to meet together following our regularly scheduled meeting or preceding it. And I would strongly recommend that we not cancel those meetings, but in fact add study sessions to them. There have been numerous objections to the large number of special meetings that have no formal public comments on record, and to the number of study sessions in the past that have not been officially recorded with the recordings posted on the city's website. So I propose that we do have those study sessions on those dates, but that we also have a formal planning commission meeting that will allow for public comment and for formal recording of the entire session.
Go ahead, Dan.
Judith, can you explain, can you just give a little sense of what you think the timing would look like on those evenings?
In the past, when we have canceled our usual planning commission meetings in order to hold joint sessions with the city council, we've started at 6-ish and gone for as long as the council has the patience to go. Those sessions are then chaired by the mayor rather than by the planning commission chair. And
Judith, I think I'm asking more specifically.
okay, wait,
So,
and they're not recorded. We've already moved the official time when we start our planning commission meetings up to 5:30. We could keep it there, schedule a planning commission meeting for the first hour and follow that with a study session with the city council, or in fact, invite the city council to attend our planning commission meeting.
so your suggestion, what I just heard, was that we would perhaps have planning commission for the first hour and then switch over to the joint study session after that?
Right, or we could flip it in the opposite direction so that after having heard the study session, members of the public could comment on what they've heard. There are a number of different ways to do it, but I don't think that actually canceling our meeting and then having an unrecorded session with the city council provides an adequate opportunity for us to fulfill our role in allowing the public to be represented directly.
Thank you, Judith. Any other comments? Peter?
As far as I know, the city council planning commission study session is scheduled for 6 to 9 o'clock. I mean, speaking for myself, 3 hours of intense discussion is a lot. And in order to really get the work done that we need to get done, I think we need to direct our energies to that study session. I mean, there are plenty of planning commission meetings where the public can comment, and they do. I think those meetings should be focused on us collaborating with the city council and making decisions.
They still will be in what I'm thinking of, but we would also have an opportunity for the public to speak at those meetings, but more importantly, the meetings would be recorded, and what occurs at them will then become part of a lasting public record. Typically, study sessions are not recorded, and the public has no opportunity to speak at them.
If I may, I just want to correct the statement that the public won't have the opportunity to speak. Study sessions do allow for public comment. So
They only allow for public comment if the chair decides to ask for it, and frequently the chair has decided not to. This is in my 15-plus years doing city council planning commission study sessions.
yeah,
Although
I
these-
don't mean to disagree, but the agenda for study sessions requires a public comment portion. Typically, that's held at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, it's the mayor who runs those joint sessions, not
That
the
is
planning
correct.
chair anyways.
That
Okay,
is correct.
thank you. Do any other commissioners have comments or opinions about this issue? Matt?
I have a question about recording. I have not been to as many study sessions, but I remember the last ones we had were on a Saturday, and there was some issue about recording on a weekend. And I'm wondering if a study session held on a regular Tuesday time would have that same problem of recording the session.
It's less about the date and time. We can get the personnel to do the tech side of it. Obviously, weekends are a little bit more challenging. It's more the format of the meeting. Typically, study sessions are, not held where the attendees are at the dais with, microphones on each person and that sort of thing. So, your, concerns about the recording have been noted, and I will convey those to the mayor and the city manager. But for right now, the study sessions are set for 6 o'clock on those dates. And the mayor sets those meetings.
Joel, did you have anything to weigh in on this?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Dan.
would like to just say that I reflect on what Peter said. I've sat through nearly, can you go outside? I've sat through nearly as many of these as Commissioner Mayor, and it is a real time to engage in some important dialogue with the City Council. Like, I feel like it's precious. Like, we're these two entities that are tasked with a really important charge, and for us to be able to have that dialogue opportunity is, to me, is crucial. And I super welcome the public comment, and if we need to send a request to the mayor that we want public comment to be robust, or give ample opportunity for it, stop the meeting early enough to leave time, or however it gets scheduled, that sounds crucial. But for us to just start, a third of the evening or something with our own meeting, and then have them come in at 7 or something, feels, I don't quite see how that would play out structurally, functionally. I mean, we wouldn't get much done in that short hour. We wouldn't get to engage in any real dialogue. We would be kind of just, I don't know what we'd be chewing on for that hour, but we'd be waiting for the regular meeting, the real meeting to start. That's.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate the long perspective you bring there, Dan. In some ways, I kind of think cancel the meeting is a bit unfortunate turn of phrase, because it makes it seem like we're deciding not to have a meeting in some fashion. Really, we are having a meeting. It's at our regular scheduled time. We're just having it along with the city council. And I agree with Dan that when I think about what serves the public the best, the opportunity to hear the planning commission and the city council in real time, in the same place, in the same time, hash out these issues that are so important to the public, that to me feels like I want to preserve as much bandwidth there for the community to hear those discussions and for those discussions to take place. As noted, public comment will occur. I appreciate your comments and concerns, Judith, but, well, we'll need a motion to move this forward, as everyone's had a.
So just to get clear here, technically we are required to cancel the meeting just so that we can have a joint session. Is that correct? Or
Correct.
is there an alternative that, Judith, you would like to suggest that doesn't have the word cancellation in it and still includes robust public comment?
Yes, there. I'd like to propose that we call it a joint meeting. That would still allow the mayor to chair it. It would still make clear that public comment is a part of it, and it would require that it be recorded, and that recording would become part of the public record. It would also allow us to have an agenda that could conceivably include some action items. And I know that in study sessions, we typically don't have action items, but this would actually provide an opportunity for the Planning Commission and the City Council to actually be acting on the same motion rather than subsequently. We haven't done this in the past. This is not part of Arcata's institutional culture to date. It could be an experiment, at least for the first meeting. But I think some opportunity to get whatever happens at that meeting on record and to provide opportunities for the public to speak would be really important. We could request that the mayor include that as part of the meeting, and we could request that the city record it and post it on both the city council's and the planning commission's recording records. I don't know how that works.
As I mentioned before, I'm happy to convey this to the city manager and the mayor. The desire to do that. Any way you slice it, you have to cancel the meetings if you plan to have a joint study session. Regular meetings are encoded in our municipal code. There is currently no regular joint meeting of the city council and the planning commission. In order to have that meeting, you have to cancel your meeting because it happens on the same date. This should be
Okay.
pretty straightforward.
Whatever we do as a solution, it's going to require us to cancel our meetings. However, we have a meeting with the city council. So would anyone like to make a motion that we do that so that we can schedule time to have this joint session, whatever we call it, with the city council?
So move. I
And if-
move we cancel our meetings
And
on
if we-
those 3 dates and have a joint session with the city council with public comment. And we encourage the mayor to include public comment.
Okay, and then to convey as well, if you'd like to add this into the motion, the idea of trying to have the meeting recorded as well.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Notwithstanding the technical complications, I think just getting that meeting recorded in some fashion would be helpful for the public.
And just for our
Zero.
notes, did we have any abstentions or no votes on that motion?
I didn't speak. I guess that means I abstain.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Okay, and before we're done with this, we still have to consider the holiday dates of 11/28 and 12/26. Given the holiday travel, regardless of Christmas, the 12/26 date looks like a difficult one to get a majority of the commissioners to attend. But I'm interested to hear what people's opinion is on the 11/28 date and whether we should try to keep that one on the docket.
I'd actually like to just move that we cancel both of those second meetings in November and December.
Okay, we have a motion to cancel both of those. Do we have a second?
I would second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Oppose? No.
Okay, motion passes. We will cancel both the 11/28 and 12/26 planned meetings. Thank you, everyone, for that. Okay, now we are ready to move into our next agenda item, which is to consider a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan updates. Can we begin with a staff report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Wanted to start by giving a outline of the meeting tonight and then turn it over to our consultant who's online to give a presentation about the Gateway Code and then to review briefly the homework assignment that we set out last time, to talk about the other considerations table and to look at the results from that, if there's time. This is a much anticipated meeting where the Planning Commission is to give a recommendation to the City Council on.
Could you make that available on that screen?
Yeah, it's not currently, in fact, we're not currently onto that piece of it, so we'll bring it up and focus on it. You did have copies of it in advance, and there were it was in your staff report from last meeting, or from this meeting. So the intent here is that the Planning Commission will arrive at a recommendation on as much of the work that you've been doing in earnest for the last year as possible, recognizing that the recommendation may be that there are still components that you want to continue to work on. And so we will work through that by the end of this night's meeting and try and get as much compiled as possible. I will remind you that at our last meeting, we looked at the general plan elements, and this was the homework assignment from the previous meeting. We looked at the general plan elements to determine which of those the commission could not recommend because there wasn't a majority of commissioners who were willing to move those forward. At that time, it appeared that all of the elements had enough votes to move them forward, potentially with the exception of the introduction, pending Commissioner Mayer's votes. I do want to recognize that Commissioner Mayer's votes were not counted in that straw poll that we did, as she was on vacation and wasn't able to turn in the items. So can take another look at that if you want to, and revisit that if you choose to. But the way that the votes stacked up as of last week, all of the elements are ready for a recommendation of some form or the other. We prepared a recommendation, a couple of bullet points for you at the beginning of the staff report under the recommendation heading. If any commissioner wishes to make that recommendation, or you may modify it based on the conversation that you have tonight. So we'll get through that by the end of this evening, and I'd like to move into the presentation on the Gateway Code. As of a couple of meetings ago, you decided to spend the remainder of your time working on the Gateway Code instead of going back to the bike rack issues or going into other general plan elements, and so we're going to really concentrate our energies there. Recognizing that there's information that's going to come out tonight in this presentation that that may give you pause or have you reconsider some positions or have other areas that you want to evaluate in the Gateway Code. I just want to encourage you that is fine to say, hey, look, everything except for these issues, whatever they may be, we're ready to make a recommendation on for the Gateway Code. Or you could say we're not quite there yet. That's totally fine as well. You could say, we need more time with the Gateway Code before we make a formal recommendation. And then the hope is that by the end of this evening, we'll have that recommendation. And then as well as that, to appoint the chair to present this information to the City Council at its next meeting, just to provide the City Council a report for, the topics that you work through, where the okay, I have an officer coming. Let me see if I can get them to come quicker.
Yeah, we'll just hit the pause button. Does he need medical care?
emergency with a member of the audience, so we're changing the feed right now, and we'll be ready for you in just a second. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, of course. Bye.
We might as well take a 5-minute bio break and turn this off. We'll come back at 6:25. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Peter.
All right, we are back. It is a little after 6:25. We're dealing with some unusual circumstances here in council chambers, so we are going to restart this meeting, but we expect at some point we're going to have to hit the pause button again. So appreciate everyone's patience as we work through this and try and stay focused on this evening's agenda. I'll turn it back over to David.
Okay, so kind of lost track of where I was, but I'd like to turn this over to our consultant so we can get into the Gateway Codes site tests. Let's see.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. And I'm going to try and turn on my video here. Excellent. It's a little toasty up here in El Cerrito, or down here in El Cerrito. Anyhow, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Ryan Call with Urban Field Studio. I'm an architect. I specialize in master planning, and I've spent the last 20 years working for a combination of public sector and private sector clients. And what I was tasked to do here tonight was to take the planning criteria that you've all been working very hard on and simply test them on the various opportunity sites that you have and take a look at what we get for results and then see how we respond and what observations we might make from that effort. I'll go through the show as kind of quickly and briefly as I can, but at the end we can go into as much depth as you would like. So one thing I just want to say that Arcata's urban fabric is incredible. The street grid that you have, the block sizes, it's one of the most walkable and well-connected cities. And so it's really exciting to see these very progressive ideas in your planning code take shape and contribute to a built environment that everyone can afford. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I was given four opportunity sites in your city to test the various zoning criteria for potential housing mixed-use projects. And what we're trying to do through this exercise is really understand how would a plan actually take shape on these parcels? How would the retail orient itself? How would the residential units potentially orient themselves, or the parking? One thing I want to say is that there's more than one way to do this. What we're showing tonight is one solution for the sites, and we're learning from it, but it doesn't mean that it's the solution that the site will eventually take shape. It's just this is a tool to kind of learn from this exercise and refine our thinking. So the results that we're looking for is how many units do we produce from one of these sites? Does it match our expectations? The height limits that we have, which we're testing in their full permissible state, do those yield too many units, not enough units, etc. So it's a way we can align your expectations with some of the planning results. And then the next part of this is, do we foresee any obstacles to development, and specifically to inclusive development that is designed and more affordable for workforce or lower income residents in some cases. So the four opportunity sites reside in 3 different zoning areas in your city. 2 land in the corridor zoning area, Site G and Site L, and 1 lands in the barrel and the other in the neighborhood. So these have slightly, the corridor are limited to 5-story, 60 feet. The barrel designation, which is your largest opportunity site, has a slightly higher height limit. And then the neighborhood designation down at the bottom has your lowest height limit at 40.
Oop.
So this is
sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sure.
Well, we're having a medical emergency here in the chamber, and we're going to have to.
No worries at all. Yeah, I can pause.
Okay, Ryan, sorry for the interruption. I think we've got you back on, so if you can go ahead and start with the test sites again.
Great. Okay. So quick recap. I was just going over the opportunity sites and the different categories that they fall in. And for reference, just so that there's less mystery about what units per acre and those kinds of things mean, I'm just going to walk through some of the kind of generalizations of what units per acre look like. And then we can, as we go through the site tests, we can jump back to these slides if you need reference to kind of have an idea of what scale of the architecture that the dwelling units per acre might look like. So on the lower end, single family homes, duplexes, these fall under about 12 units per acre. Townhomes range in the 13 to 24, depending on the size of the townhome. The 20 to 30 units per acre tends to be a 3-story product. A lot of times it's surface parked. And then going over 40 units per acre, you're really looking at structured parking, where you have multiple levels of parking stacked, either in a podium or a wrap format, which we'll demonstrate in the next couple slides. So these slides take it up just a notch from the 40 units per acre. These are really variations of higher densities, except for the one on the left. This is the 20 to 28 units per acre. This is kind of a workforce format where they're smaller units, maybe a 900 to 1,000 square foot average, 2 or 3 bedroom combinations. And these are 20 to 28 units per acre, and they utilize surface parking for purposes of cost efficiency. The example on the right is a 40 to 60 units per acre product. This is where you have a structured parking garage that is wrapped by the housing. Slightly taller, you have a type 3, which is a 5-story product where it has a little more fire protection. It's a slightly and more expensive form of construction, but it's a very common wood frame product. It also tends to coexist with a wrap structure behind it if it's in that 5-story category. The example on the right is a type 3 over a podium. And what a podium means is that you have usually 1 or 2 stories of a parking structure in concrete, type 1 construction. And over top of that, you'll have 5 stories type 3 construction. So there's 2 construction types, and you end up with a 7-story building. And this is where the zoning in the barrel corridor allows this particular height of building. Okay. Some really quick background on different types of parking, just so as you hear about it, this will be kind of in your head. Parking in unit. This is where townhomes, part of the wood frame construction, will have a parking space for that particular unit. It's dedicated and it's internal to that unit. So that's in-unit parking. Surface parking in the middle there is where you have a surface parking lot adjacent, not under, but just adjacent to the apartment construction. Wrapped parking is where you have a freestanding, well, you have a on-ground parking structure. It's not over any residential units or any other uses, and there's nothing on top of it. It's a horizontal mixed-use kind of concept, but there's a parking structure that is then wrapped. And if you can see my cursor, I'm showing how the residential units wrap on the outside face of that parking structure. The more dense and more urban product is called a podium, as we described earlier. And what you'll see here with my cursor is a 2-story parking deck. You can even kind of see the entry right there. And then above that parking deck, you'll see the residential product. And so you're stacking the housing over top of the parking deck, which uses the land at a higher efficiency, but it also comes with a greater cost because you're layering those uses vertically. And then on the right here is something that we're seeing a lot more of, which is mechanical parking. And essentially you build a tall 1-story concrete box for your parking, and then you're able to use mechanical, basically car elevators, to stack the cars vertically over each other. And you can press a button and the elevator goes down and you retrieve your car. So it's not very common, I would say, in smaller communities, but this is something becoming much more common in urban areas where 6 or 7 story buildings are found. Our methodology is I was given the 4 opportunity sites, and I was given a variety of tables that described the front, side, rear setbacks, the distances from the property line to start the building. I was given the building heights and any step back requirements. And step backs are where you go up a certain height and then back another 8 feet for 75% of the building facade. And then I was given parking requirements and open space requirements. So I took all of that data and used AutoCAD to draft up what the building envelope could be and then how the program could theoretically lay out inside. So now we'll jump into the specific site tests for each opportunity site. Site G, this is bounded by 10th, K, L, and 9th. So it's about a quarter mile from your Arcata Plaza, which is incredible. It's extremely walkable to all of those commercial amenities. It's a little less than 1.5 acres, which is a good size. The one big challenge that came with this site, it's also an opportunity, is the Jolly Giant Creek. And there is a desire to daylight as much of that natural feature as possible. But we have to balance that with what a practical building layout might take. So this is one idea about how a building might maximize the permitted height to generate units for the site. And so we looked at daylighting about half of the creek so that we could have 2 very efficient legs of housing and a central elevator core that serves both legs, and then exit stairs, and then basically units on each side of the corridor. And that efficiency of having a single corridor serve units on both sides really helps keep the cost of the building practical and make the building more feasible. So that's a concept that we've applied in every site test that you'll see. The yield here was 87 units, so it's about 60 units per acre. And the average unit size is about 950 square feet. We kept that consistent through all of the studies. So that'd be kind of apples to apples. And then because of the limited site area available, we are using structured parking to kind of test the capacity of this project. Some of our observations about this particular site is that it's a great site for housing. It's the kind of housing you want. You want it close to all those commercials and local businesses. You want it walkable so that you're not driving everywhere. And your parking ratios, which are quite low, really support that culture. One challenge that we ran into is that the large setbacks reduce the buildable area. What that does is that can sometimes be a limit on lower density projects. For higher density, you can kind of work around that. But on the lower density 3-story projects, which may be more financially feasible in your community, you start to run out of room to produce enough units to cover the costs of the development. So it can discourage smaller local developers from building a lower height project. Structured parking is quite expensive. It can be a challenge to finance if rents are not high enough. The surrounding neighborhood, in terms of retail, it's not a super strong walkable urban retail destination. So there's a good chance that the retail here would struggle to survive or might suffer from turnover. So you might want to consider whether or not retail is really necessary in this particular location, if there's other live-work uses or just residential uses that can keep the streets vibrant. Let's see, the daylighting the creek up to 10th would basically slice the building into 2, though you could bridge the 2 buildings. It would present a premium cost which would then drive up rents on the units in order to generate the return necessary to pencil the project. So I think that's where it'll be great to have your input, is what is that fine balance between getting a building that does more in terms of features, but might come at a higher cost, which requires higher rents. So we'll move on to the next site, Site L. This is just a couple blocks south, bounded by.
I'm sorry,
8.
Ryan. Sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. We had a commissioner with a quick question, but we were hoping the presentation could go all the way through and then ask
all right.
questions at the end. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We're good to go.
Write that down. and I'll be happy to go back through these. All right, so I'll be quick. This one is a couple blocks south. It's also on K Street. It's has 8th and 6th, and the benefit of L, which is a great bike and pedestrian corridor. It's also 250 by 250, so a little less than 1.5 acres, and it follows some of the same requirements. The big advantage, of course, is there's no creek, so it gives you a much more robust building footprint to work with. So to kind of do the exercise of maximizing what the unit count could be with the height that's given, we went with a structured parking format, and we were able to generate 122 units, which is 84 units per acre, which is on par for a podium construction building. And we've got about 6,000 square feet of retail, and this is all in 5 stories and a 60-foot height limit. The building takes kind of a backward C floor plan where the retail's on K Street. You would perhaps have a residential lobby with your leasing office and mailbox and all that kind of great stuff that come with the building. And then on the upper levels, a very clean and efficient double-loaded corridor residential layout. Some of the observations, again, there will be a little repetition here. The large setbacks make it tougher for smaller or lower height buildings to produce enough units to be financially feasible. So that's just something to consider. The structured parking is expensive, which may require higher rents or luxury units to help cover those costs if it's feasible at all. And then similar issue, shops and restaurants in this area. It's a little more industrial on this side of town, and there's probably not a regular pattern of robust foot traffic to support an urban format of retail. So it's a high risk retail product. And then looking at setbacks, I think what's really great about Arcata is all throughout your city in the older parts of town, porches on homes are actually close enough to sidewalks where you could have a conversation without yelling at each other. And I see that oftentimes in a lot of older cities where the outdoor room concept is prevalent almost along every streetscape. What you don't see in a lot of modern, more suburban communities is the setbacks actually create a little too much distance between the public realm and the resident. And so that's a balance that we want to get your input and feedback on and understand where the right balance is between you've got a taller building, but then you're also kind of pushing people away from the building with the setbacks. Site I, this is your biggest site of the 4 opportunity sites. It's a tremendous opportunity to provide a meaningful amount of workforce housing in your community. It's consolidated ownership. There's just a lot of advantages here. So it's a little over 2.5 acres. And one of the big advantages that comes with that is you have a lot more space for a variety of different solutions. So again, some of the other concepts apply here, but this is a really great site for either a wrapped housing product, a podium housing product, or perhaps even a 3-story product, I think, if we can play with reducing the setbacks a little bit. So our observations here, this is a really great site for the city. The large setbacks and stepbacks can add some cost to the building, which then may make affordable housing or workforce housing less efficient and more expensive, which sometimes encourages the luxury products. the ground level retail, I think, is just a little too bit far from your city core. It's a real stretch. One of the challenges if the retail is not successful is that the street can be a little less safe if those are vacant storefronts. And so if you consider solutions where you have a residential or live work design that's sensitive to creating those kind of social outdoor rooms, sometimes those can bring more life to the street than high risk retail. And then one consideration, I'm not an economist, but a real consideration for the site is the cost of relocating the existing health center. All right, we're almost there. Fourth site. This is a small lot example. And I get really excited about these because when you look at a city like Arcata with so much building diversity, different eras, different sizes, different widths, different heights, that all comes by having fragmented ownership of the blocks. Each landowner building has a different vision for what it should be, and you get a really kind of multifaceted experience of the built environment. So looking at any way to preserve and encourage small lot development into a quality housing product where you have maybe 4 or 5 projects on the block rather than one super block, I think is really important to preserve the character of Arcata. So on this test, we just wanted to, okay, what if we maximize the units for the allowable height? Is it possible to have retail on this site? And then what would structured parking look like to support a project here? And so we were able to yield 27 dwelling units, which is 62 units per acre. There is about 3,500 square feet of retail space and just a very small number of internal parking spaces. The challenge is the site's quite small, the setbacks are quite large, so there isn't a lot of room for parking. So observations, the 20-foot setbacks are a little bit out of character with other parts of your city for buildings in this height group. It's a very generous setback on both sides of the street. That's a difficult location for retail due to the low foot traffic and lack of nearby kind of urban type storefronts and restaurants and things. For a small site like this, I've seen helped other communities consider the use of street parking to meet the parking demands for the building. And what that does is it allows a lower height, less expensive residential building to be developed. It decreases cost, but it also can increase your unit count. And then this site may also be a good possibility for townhomes if that's a desirable housing product for your community. So some general recommendations, we just have a small number here. Determine if the smaller setbacks combined with lower height structures permit comparable or acceptable density. Essentially, can you meet most of your housing goals with something a little lower, easier to build, and more accessible to a locally based, regionally based developer, which is often the case on smaller buildings. Looking at some of your setbacks throughout your city and how the narrow sidewalks and the narrow setbacks actually bring people together in a way that you can't really avoid each other, which I think is actually a really good thing for a community. So I think there's some really valuable characteristics we can draw from and influence the zoning criteria while also supporting the economic feasibility of projects. Be careful with zoning criteria that reduce efficiency and add cost. These ultimately discourage workforce housing or affordable housing. And they drive either a luxury product or they drive no development at all. And this is something that we've seen happen all throughout the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, but also other communities. There's a lot of benefit working with an economist who understands how a developer might look at a particular site. So one recommendation we often provide is having an economist take these site tests and basically say, if the site test is something that you're excited about in terms of the housing product that it generates, let's test it and see if a developer would feel the same way. And what can we learn from a developer perspective in the generation of housing? Nice thing about an economist is they're not vested in a financial return. They're just helping you with the facts, so they can be neutral. And then lastly, where you have a retail use that may struggle, as in it's too far from, other retail districts, such as the core of your city, maybe consider looking at residential or live work uses that can create, vibrant streets, but of course a different character, and maybe feeling a little more neighborhoody or local, versus a commercial retail experience. But sometimes that is a better solution than having a vacant storefront in terms of creating a safe and community-oriented street. So that's the show, and I'm happy to take questions.
Appreciate that, Ryan. At this point, we will entertain questions from commissioners, but also I want to make sure that we include public comment before we have deliberations.
Great.
Go ahead, Peter.
I have a question about the size of the units that you described. You described them as 950 to 1,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
What are
As an
they?
average.
Yeah, on the average. What are they like? Who would live in them?
So I'll just bring up this page, and essentially what you'll see, if you can see my cursor, this is one of the larger 3-bedroom units. What I did is I took a recent multifamily project that's aimed at families and young single people, and also elderly people who might be downsizing. And you're starting to see more and more of this project along, arterial corridors where there's really good public transit. And so the 900 square foot average means that you're going to have some 3-bedroom units. And that 3-bedroom unit could be really attractive to a family of 4. A 2-bedroom unit is sometimes really attractive to a young couple who wants to have a guest room or a guest office, or they're just roommates. The studio, it's important to have a few of those layered in there for people that are just looking for an inexpensive place to start renting. And then of course 1-bedrooms. So the 946 square foot number, it gives you a flexibility to have a variety of unit sizes. If we start to drive that average number down into like 750 or 800, then we're talking more 1-bedrooms and 2s and studios, and that's a little bit more limited spectrum. It'll produce a higher units per acre, but it may not give you the flexibility to serve families.
So even if it's, say, 1,000 square feet, it can have 3 bedrooms?
Yes, that's a very common format in multifamily buildings to have, you don't have any stairs, they're a flat unit. You can have, efficient 3-bedroom layouts. They're typically the corner units. Well, and keep in mind that the 950 square feet is an average. So the 3-bedroom units are probably more around 1,200 square feet. And that average, and instead of the average number being 1,200 square feet, it's brought down because there's a presence of studios that are smaller or 1-bedrooms that are smaller. So not every unit is 950 square feet. That's simply the average of all the different unit blend. So I do have the AutoCAD files for these units. These are based on a multifamily project being proposed on El Camino Real, and essentially your 3 bedrooms are, the rooms are no smaller than 11 by 12, and the living rooms, yeah, so they're good sized units. The average is fairly high.
Do any other commissioners? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan, do you design differently if there's a goal of occupancy ownership rather than renters in these buildings?
You do. And, you know, ownership, a lot of times a very profitable model for ownership units is to sell townhomes, essentially urban townhomes, because what you end up with is, you know, usually 1 to 2 parking spaces that are in a dedicated guaranteed spot, and you have a actually more economical form of construction, and you end up with larger units. A townhouse unit could easily be 1,200 to 1,600 square feet or even larger. So I think if you're looking at workforce housing, that's where the flats really have an advantage. But if you're looking for sale, you know, oftentimes that is a townhouse product. But there are certainly examples of condominiums that are flats that are, you know, for sale. And oftentimes these apartment buildings are mapped for a condominium in the event that the building is converted at a later date into for sale product.
Thank you.
Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you looked at any of these options instead of having an average unit size of 900 some square feet at projects with mainly smaller units. Part of our housing demand here is for students and for single people, and it doesn't necessarily seem that the 900 some square foot unit would serve them. A lot of our density aspirations, I think, are linked to developments with smaller units. Did you look at that at all?
Yeah. So most often when well, okay, there's a couple ways to look at this. Since this is a planning exercise, I think we try to, you know, approach it with flexibility and not knowing exactly what the market is going to want. What we don't want to do is kind of misinform or say, for instance, we went with an average of 700 square feet. An average of 700 square feet is actually quite common in a place like Berkeley, you know, with University of California, Berkeley, and a large student population. And the challenge with that, though, is it will generate an extremely high units per acre for these sites. And what that may do, though, is tell people that you have an extremely high density. But then when the market actually comes to development and the buildings come in with a different blend and a higher square footage average, then folks will wonder, where is that units per acre? So for purposes of planning exercises, we like to build in just a little fat into people's expectations so that if the building units come in larger, which is oftentimes a little more common in communities that have slightly lower rents, then it just provides flexibility. So if we wanted to test these with a smaller unit average, like an increased blend of 1-bedrooms and studios, then certainly we could test what those numbers would be. It would simply drive your units per acre up higher. I don't think it would change the form of the building at all.
Okay, I have another linked question. One of the things that we have been debating are parking requirements for on-site parking, and you in all of these scenarios, a bit of the crunch comes for what do you do with the cars? I'm wondering if you were perhaps thinking of, except in the one site where you suggested on-street parking, what would this look like without having to provide so much parking? Since that did seem to be a determining design factor in 3 of the 4 of your designs.
So certainly, what I would say is it's important to do a planning exercise that looks at things from a planning perspective in terms of our goals are to reduce use of the automobile, to increase the production of housing, to increase the affordability of housing. When you're looking at a larger site, which is the size of an entire city block, then you're looking at a much more expensive and complex development. And when you're looking at a more complex, expensive development, likely you're looking at a partnership in financing. And a part of this is speculation, but I am trying to create a somewhat more reality-based set of constraints. And so if a bank is financing the construction of an apartment building, they will want to see at least some level of parking provided to ensure that there's a very strong value in their development. In small lot development, I think there's a little less pressure for that joint financing where you're developing 1/6 of a city block. But when you're developing an entire city block under one project, then I think it's hard not to provide at least some parking in the project for that. But this is where an economist would be really helpful, I think, too.
Do any other commissioners have questions for Ryan? Matt, go ahead.
One of the observations in the packet was about the increased costs of step backs above a certain story. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Sure. So a step back, a lot of residential developers depend on efficiency to keep costs down. When you add a step back, essentially imagine your corridor and the structure for your building, your corridor that is running through the building is going to stack vertically. The bathrooms for cost efficiency will stack vertically so that your plumbing chases and your heater, everything, runs vertically and sufficient. When you have an 8-foot step back above the 3rd level for the 4th level, essentially what you're doing is shaving off the living room and a huge chunk of the bedrooms for those unit plans as you go across that portion of the building. And it requires things to be the units have to get wider horizontally in order to deal with the lack of depth that they've been hit with. It also has the repercussion of shrinking kitchens and things like that. So the developer looks at their spreadsheet and says 70% of my building is very efficient, and then 30% of it is inefficient. And so the way they recoup those costs is usually by angling for higher rents, or they look at ways to waive that requirement in negotiating with the city. So one way to do step backs that might be a little more cost efficient is to consider it at a higher level. So as I mentioned in those early slides, type 5 construction, stops at 4 stories. The wood frame part of it does. So if your step back is above that 4-story break, at least the developer has an ability to build that type 5 construction up to 4 stories in a very cost efficient way, which increases the likelihood that that product will get built.
Thank you.
Joel, go ahead.
Yeah. Is there an inflection point in construction costs based on the height, number of stories of a building? In other words, at the 3rd story, if you build above that, is a 4th story significantly more, increase the entire cost of the building significantly more, or the 5th story or the 6th story?
Yes, and what's really interesting is there's a building code for accessibility, and it's called the Rule of 3. And essentially, if your building is 3 stories, but your footprint is less than 3,000 square feet, then you're not required to have an elevator. And it seems like a small thing, but elevators do present a cost for developers that sometimes, it creates a challenge. And so developers will sometimes look to do 3-story buildings without elevators and keep the footprints smaller. And then they have maybe a small break between the buildings. And then also surface parking. And so parking is the other component. The taller your building gets, the more complex it gets, the parking costs go up. And so if you have parking that is structured, you need to also produce a lot more units if there's market demand for those units, and in order to cover the cost of that construction. So if you think about a parking space, structured parking is about $40,000 space. A studio unit might only be 300 square feet. So essentially you're building 300 square feet of garage for a 300 square foot studio in order to support it. So that's where I would say the taller buildings trigger more parking. And then there's also construction types. When I walk through those earlier slides, the most economical is going to be 3 stories without an elevator. The next step is 4 stories, type 5 with an elevator. And then you go up to type 3 construction, which is more expensive, but it gives you an extra story. But there's a lot of math and financial feasibility that has to be considered, I think, by either a developer or an economist. But I have actually been surprised that there are a lot of markets where they cannot support the extra cost of a 5th story because the rents aren't high enough. So they actually will not build those extra units.
Do you know examples of small, perhaps Northern California towns outside of the Bay Area that have built 5th-story buildings or more?
It's not very common. No, I've done a lot of work in Brentwood. I've done a lot of work in Vacaville, and even looking at Dublin, California, there's only a small portion of Dublin, California that will support structured parking. And what's interesting is 10 years ago, it was a lot cheaper to build structured parking. But in this particular part of the economic cycle where there's a shortage of labor and the labor costs are extremely high, the feasibility of structured parking has diminished. And so what you're seeing a lot more of are these 3-story walk-up or a lot of townhouse construction where you're not using podiums at all. So, I suspect I know a little bit where you're coming at, is that the height limits that are in these criteria are quite generous. And so the buildings that we're showing in these examples are all taller buildings with structured parking. And whether or not those buildings can be built in the immediate future, I'm not an economist, but my speculation is that they'd be difficult to build right now. Will they be able to be constructed in the future? It's possible. What I would maybe consider is it's really your setbacks are one of the big considerations, which I believe that there has been some discussion already about maybe reducing those. But if you can provide a little more area of land to work with where you can actually fit a lower building, 3-story building, and some surface parking and the circulation needed to get around the site inside, then you'll have some flexibility to let the market inform how much density can be built on these sites.
Yeah, Ryan, how much of that economic analysis is based on what you consider to be market rate and versus the constraints put on development by potential financial partners?
This is where my experience is being adjacent to the experts and not being the experts in terms of financial feasibility. And so I often work with a group called Kaiser Marston Associates, And what I do in these processes is I take a set of planning criteria, I do a site test, and I give it to Kaiser Marston. I tell them what the average unit size is, the building height, the length of facade, all of those factors I give to them, and they basically run a pro forma. And that pro forma looks at what the acquisition costs are for the land, what the recent history, comparables are. It looks at if you're tearing down a business, what relocation fees you might have. So it puts in so many considerations that are out of my wheelhouse. And then they come back and they say, Ryan, we need you to look at a different product because what we're seeing is construction costs that maybe exceed the return. And so then we try a different site test. So that's a process that does take some time and consideration. I think one way to approach zoning criteria that has a long-term life is to just make sure that you've got flexibility in it and look at these sites for not just high density solutions, but for moderate density solutions, and make sure that your planning criteria can be responsive to the needs of both so that they can support, if an opportunity comes along, you can support it and get that housing produced for your community.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for Ryan from commissioners?
Yeah, I have one.
Go ahead, Dan.
Ryan, roughly speaking, what you see in the Gateway plan and the rezoning that's being discussed, are you encouraged by the concept?
Yeah, no, I think, I wouldn't close doors on density. And I think you have an incredible commercial district and collection of historic buildings. And you have just outside of that, less than half a mile, these great opportunity sites. And so I see a lot of value in having an opportunity, if one comes along, to build a denser project in those locations because it's going to support your transit infrastructure. It's going to support your local businesses. It's going to allow people to have some choice in the housing type they live in and the cost of the housing they live in. So I think those are all extremely admirable aspects of these plans. I would be very careful, and this is in our recommendations, that the criteria, that when you introduce criteria such as large setbacks that increase, or the step backs at the higher level that increase the cost of housing, just be conscious that it sometimes comes with higher rents or a luxury-oriented product. And that's kind of the balance that you have to take. And I would be, one concept that we do in some communities is that if you're under a certain height of building, your setbacks can be less, so that there's less solar impact with a lower building. So let's give the developer a little more site to work with, so you can squeeze in surface parking or these other approaches to making a building work.
Great, thank you. At this point, I would like to open this up for public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Feel free, please, to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
Again, my name is Anthony DeLuca, and I appreciate the presentation that Ryan just gave all of us. A few things I wanted to say. One of the things he mentioned was that if we go for as much density as possible, that we might be overdoing it. And I like the words that he used, to let the market determine the amount of density that we might want in Arcata. And I also want to point out that he called L Street a pedestrian and bike corridor, and how well that fits with the Great Redwood Trail leading to that area, and keeping it as not just a linear park, like a small, I think Fred was explaining to us that a linear park by definition is a small strip of grass. Not just that, I think this is a good opportunity to suggest that a lot of people who, when they talk about the linear park, are thinking more of like an outdoor mall, kind of like a community space where events and businesses could flourish. And let's see here. I think this may kind of bleed over into gateway stuff, but I think that the city is really trying to maximize the amount of density that they can include in these plans and projects without, thinking about infrastructure, while ignoring what the fire department has to say, while not considering the coastal commission's concerns or the wastewater treatment plant. What I believe personally is that it would be really smart and wise to kind of slow down a little bit as far as how much density we can pack in one place, and making sure that Arcata is a genuinely nice place to live, because who's going to want to live here if we're all packed in like sardines with no parking? I think that, we could easily screw this up. And so one way to not make mistakes is to go kind of at a better pace. And I liked what Ryan said again, to let the market decide. Some of this stuff's pretty complicated, so I appreciate all the hard work that you guys are putting into thinking about these things. This was the first meaningful conversation about building height that I feel I've witnessed in this entire process. And his suggestion was that we do some medium density and maybe leave the option for high density, but not really focus on that. And I wanted to point that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
James Becker, and welcome back, Commissioner Mayor. And I also found Ryan's presentation helpful. It's nice to look at something other than large boxes pushed all the way up to property lines. It's a little intimidating. I appreciate the solution of the height to setback ratio. I think that has always made sense to me, and I think that by this constant conversation about this maximum, and worried about every little last bit, it is definitely intimidating in public. But moving on from there, my recommendations is to disregard the term BTL, build to the line. This concept is completely counterproductive, especially on the L Street corridor and the future linear park. Instead, in addition to banning the K&L couplet and designate L Street as a linear park, that you establish a minimum privately owned public space on that fronts that corridor. I think it's a very valuable space. If it's the one place you're going to use your setbacks, I think it should be on L Street. Further beyond that, that once you establish those spaces, that would contribute to the corridor, and because it represents the the park of the gateway, and we could consider that to be NMP, Need More Park. Just get rid of the acronym altogether, I think. I recommend moving forward with the unilateral safety improvements to K Street and decoupling L Street from those improvements. At minimum, removing parking on the east side to allow for enhanced sidewalks and northbound bike lane. Eliminate parking on the west side to allow for clear visibility at all intersections. Install a stop sign at 7th Street, the flashing light at A Street for the Montessori School, in addition to a stop sign at 9th Street. Other flashing light, other than the flashing light, which is already planned, the stop sign and paint are cheap and are potentially life-saving solutions. I recommend increasing the mandatory percentage and the inclusionary zone beyond 5% to give more people a chance to afford in this area. Let's see here. As far as solar shading goes, I think there's a little discussion about that, the concerns about it, but it seems like with height ratios, it kind of made sense. If you need to go forward with buildings that aren't so high and you can get your densities, a lot of ways to make this work. But I just find myself expressing the simple winning combination: siding, step back, setbacks, pick any two. You can mix and match. It was proposed in the Gateway draft and was presented in form-based code forums. It has been requested by community members, and for what I remember, you all acknowledged it at previous meetings, and now some have claimed we can't afford it and act like we're being sold some swampland. I think between those would be really helpful. I think I might have some last-minute notes on this, and I would just say abandon the gap policy. GA7I would allow the movement of the L Street Trail. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Patricia Kamyanika. I want to thank Ryan. did I get that right? For the presentation. I'm a little confused why we did the exercises that we did. If I heard that, that they weren't, like each one kind of broke down why they wouldn't be feasible in a lot of situations. I was really hoping that we would actually use examples that we've been given, like it's been, or just done exercises that reflect what this plan has been proposed to the community, like smaller micro units for affordability. We've heard that a lot. I didn't see, it would have been nice to see that. Also, the limited to no off-street parking would have been nice to see examples that showed that as well. It would be really nice if the architect could come to Arcata and walk this neighborhood and see the businesses and how it's laid out and the activity that's there now before they kind of put in a development. Like the car wash, the Jolly Giant Creek is already halfway daylighted. That's already there. So the second half of the Jolly Giant Creek on that car wash property is the portion that would be daylighted, would need to be daylighted, and the structure parking is actually covering that in the diagram. It's been mentioned all these areas aren't good for a location for retail. I like to remind you the creamery business, the creamery district is right there. There's a lot of stores and businesses in there. The next block north of the car wash, you have a clothing, furniture plant, pizza, climbing gym, auto mechanics, 2 hair cutting salons, etc., just in that next block alone. So I don't think that's realistic. And AmeriGas does have a very robust foot traffic. I know you mentioned there's not a lot of foot traffic there. It's called the bicycle path, which the community really wants to be a linear park and preserve those open spaces next to the linear park and not put a road through over those spaces, which would be great for any development that went on the AmeriGas site or the Tom Parrott site. Tom Parrott site conveniently is missing the gardens, the community gardens there. They're not shown, and the existing structure, Thomas's building, is almost virtually a pretty new building in a pristine shape. First time I've heard home ownership can be actually affordable with townhouses. First one for me, so thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Oh, hello, I'm Jeff Knapp. Couple of things. I wonder if there's been a discussion of what population are we wanting to serve? I haven't heard any discussion of whether it's people with pretty good money, okay money, no money. It just seems that there ought to be some kind of a study done in terms of, okay, this is the population or the makeup or et cetera that we want to, we don't want to imagine being here. And second, I keep hearing parking, parking, parking. Where are the buses? Where are some other means of getting around in terms of this area connecting with the rest of Arcata and vice versa? And it seems to me that there should be a discussion of what are our alternatives of transportation besides a car. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Next speaker.
James Flower, Janes Road, for about the last 22 years. I'm really concerned about really large buildings being out of scale. I'm not so sure who you want to get to cram into all these great big buildings. I'm not so sure how many people you want to end up living here in the time frame you're talking about. There are a lot of single-family dwellings that would be shaded, it seems to me, by really large buildings. Somebody's going to be living in a much darker place than they bargained for, maybe who's been there a long time. So I would really urge you to consider the smaller sizes, the smaller heights of the buildings.
I'm also really quite against this couplet idea. It seems to me you're making two half-assed streets out of those two streets. The through traffic ought to be kept on K, and L ought to be a really nice place for people to be and not have traffic rushing by, and it seems to me that K Street can be made that way. I'm also confused about the borders of this place, and this is just my ignorance maybe, but I didn't hear a northern border described for this area. I keep hearing that it goes to Alliance, but Alliance continues north. It's a continuation of K Street, is it not? So that happens at 11th Street. So is 11th Street the northern border of this area that we're talking about? Can anybody tell me? Show of hands?
Oh,
Anyone?
you could find a map on the city's website, which will answer that question for you.
Okay, thanks. I'm just curious about why, I mean, Alliance goes north quite a long ways, so that confuses me. What? 17th Street. Right. Oh, yeah, okay. So I'm still not sure the northern border, and yeah, I'll go look, but I'm kind of surprised it isn't more clearly delineated. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening. I'm Keenan Hilton. I live in Arcata. I'm also here representing the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, CRTP. First, I want to strongly support the Gateway Plan, Gateway Zoning Code, and the General Plan amendments, moving Arcata forward, I think, in a really helpful and exciting way. So thank you for all of your hard work on that, both to the commissioners and to staff. And I hope that the process can move forward as quickly as possible because, of course, as I'm sure everyone in this room is sensitive to, these are, I mean, the best time to have built housing, of course, would have been, whatever, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, perhaps. So I appreciate the seriousness and the urgency with which we're moving forward with the process. It wasn't really discussed so much tonight, but just do want to voice support for, keeping the ministerial process for as many projects as possible. I think that that is a really powerful tool for being able to give developers assurances and, of course, having our say in what the objective standards will be. That's what this process is for. But being able to move forward in a timely manner after we establish what it is that we want to see the community looking like. So I think ministerial process is a very good tool. Also, a word on density. I definitely do appreciate that probably making the jump to a pretty low-rise community to very high density, it might not be the likeliest outcome in a short time frame, but I really appreciate what the speaker said about having a flexible zoning code that's going to last a long time. And I think having the allowance for higher density is, again, a really powerful thing to include as far as making this a plan that's going to last Arcata a very long time. Because I think that to the point of meeting the transit goals, density is directly correlated with transit. It's not that you get the same proportion of people using it at a higher number, but each individual person is more likely to use transit if it's in a more dense neighborhood. And indeed, I also would like to just reiterate a point that I know has been made before, and I believe it's a decision this commission has voiced support for, but not having parking minimums, because as we've seen tonight in the presentation, it's very likely that there would be parking anyway because that's what a bank wants to see. We don't need to impose that on a developer. And for many of the smaller scale ones, it would make sense to not have parking. So not imposing that requirement, I think, is very sound and good design for Arcata. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for your comments. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Scott Cocking, and I'd like to cede my three minutes to Fred Weiss.
So seated.
Thank you. I'm Fred Wise, Arcata1.com. First, on Arcata1.com, I do have the audio of the August 23rd, 2022 joint study session. and have video of all the slides and presentations that were on the screen. It is not, well, to have a video of the meeting, we can supply that for about $175 or $200. But I will be making audio of that meeting, putting it online. A variety of comments. The staff report says, quote, asking the commission to provide guidance to the staff on what topics to agendize for the next regular planning meeting. And quote, I request that the topics actually be agendized, as the staff report indicates, that each item as an agenda. This has been ruled on by the courts. Next, staff report uses the word voted. There's been no votes. There's been straw polls and often just consensus, but I object to the use of the word in order to be precise. In the form-based code on page 45 or page 62 in your packets, there's a greenway proposal, conception, greenway locations. I don't understand this. I'd like to have it explained. It shows greenways with no vehicles whatsoever running through private parcels of Greenway parcel, through the private property of the Tomas parcel, and around 7th Street between L and K, which would cut off all vehicle access to the existing Devon cottages. It shows in other locations too. I don't know whether it's an idea or conception, but it needs to be talked about and likely discarded. Once again, on the other considerations table, I consider this table to not be factual. It does not contain or track the comments from the public, and as is stated, and it contains numerous errors of fact. I'd be glad to bring these up separately. In terms of the director's use of the insertion of concurs with staff for a column-headed planning commission recommendation based on how the commission would vote, unless there is a separate column that indicates that this is his putting in there and not the planning commission's putting in there, I consider this to be not factual. The table is going to be included in your recommendation to the city council, and it should be accurate so that there's no error and no mistake. On the urban field studies, I thank Ryan for his work. It seems to me that it's very urban oriented. It doesn't seem to be based upon Arcata's needs. We've talked about the Gateway area being a thriving, vibrant center for all kinds of commercial activity. And he regularly said that this is a half a mile from Arcata's central district. As has been noted, there's going to be great retail and restaurants and throughout. It's part of the walkable aspect of it. That's what we're trying to do. When he uses the word workforce affordable, I don't see workforce affordable development in this area. There's nothing in our plan to support that. I think the discussion of building heights was sobering for all of us. At the risk of sounding egotistical, I said this a year ago. This area does not support tall buildings based upon the rents. He had a focus on parking, but as we know, much of the requirement will be 1/4 space per unit. Parking is not as big of an issue. As is noted, the structured and mechanical parking is expensive, $40,000 to $50,000 per space. If I'm not in error, the St. Vinny site is not in the neighborhood district, as was shown. The car wash site has been noted, should have all the creek daylighted. The Julian Berg design I'll refer you to does have it all daylighted in a very good looking design. His design has no parking. The economic factors are definitely an issue, as Ryan noted. He used the phrase, structured parking can be a problem if rents are not high enough. I think structured parking is not a possibility in Arcata. As was noted, he did refer to L as a pathway, a bike corridor, which is great. He said, consider the use of street parking to lower the site needs. We've talked about making K Street have no parking on both sides. He talked about the bank wanting to see Parking, this is interesting news, which I can understand the bank's needs. It doesn't seem like he's studied what we've actually been doing here. For a lot of, say, the commercial properties, parking, that sort of thing. Commissioner Tagney asked about 6 stories being feasible. Ryan said probably not. If you remember, the former chair asked for outside experts to come in to lead us about this a year ago. He suggested 3 stories plus surface parking. I say that is not what we want. That doesn't solve the problem of creating a vibrant, walkable, beautiful community here. I'm in favor of density, despite what people may think. And if we have to support 3-story buildings or 2-story buildings because of economics, I think we need to look further. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Joanne McGarry. I did send a late email with a link to a video, wondering if that could possibly be my public comment, but I don't know if you folks saw it. Anyway, I'll mention at the end of my talk right now. I come here often. I don't always hear things clearly or see things clearly and have to go back and review, and I totally appreciate everyone's attention to detail and such. But when we're talking about our town, the city of Arcata is still a small rural college town, and what do we want it to be in the future, and what will happen to it in the future, especially with the forces of climate change, sea level rise, just the whole livability and how we live together and move around this community together. And as a previous speaker mentioned, cars, we're talking about cars all the time, and parking, and cars moving around. And I came from the Transportation Safety Committee prior to this, and it was all about speed bumps and the roads and the cars. And I have made the decision to try and live without one for as long as I can, at least for this summer, and see how I can move around differently and see the challenges that are all happening. I really am a big proponent of high density lifestyles in our community, and the need for us to learn to live together, but in a way that we can see and breathe the outside air from our front door, not from interior hallways, not with cookie cutter, design of buildings. I always go back to Sorrel Place as a starting point for what our future needs to go away from, as opposed to emulate or copy. So I guess I just want us to always pull back a little bit when we're talking about the nitty-gritties and the details of all this design and codes and things like that. To what do we want our town to be like in the future, and what can it be in a climate changing future? And business as usual, design as usual, development as usual is not what the future is going to need. It's going to need creative new thought. Tomorrow or today is Buckminster Fuller's birthday. If you want to just be reminded of the creativity of one person to really make us thoughtful about how we look at how we design things, he would be the one. So my final thing is Google R. Crum, Joni Mitchell, and watch the video. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'm sorry. You had your 3 minutes, and I'm going to now move to any commenters that are waiting online.
Go ahead, Lulu.
Great, thank you. Hi, Planning Commissioners. My name is Lulu Michelson. Thank you for the opportunity to give comment this evening. I'm a renter in Arcata, and I am also the co-director of ROCKR, the Redwood Coalition for Climate and Environmental Responsibility. And I'm here tonight to sort of share that ROCKR believes that the Gateway Area Plan is an important step for climate-friendly development of desperately needed housing in Arcata. I'm here to express our support for the Gateway Plan and Zoning Code and its speedy adoption. We really want to recognize all of the time, dedication, and thoughtfulness that this commission has invested in reviewing the plan. And we urge you to build on all that progress and make a positive recommendation to the City Council tonight. Specifically, Rocker is excited about denser development in the Gateway area. Density is climate friendly, it encourages equitable transportation and prevents sprawl. We welcome the strategic use of taller buildings as a way to conserve the farm and wild lands that make this county so special. It really is a question of, if we don't build up, we're going to build out, and building out, I think, is not the environmentally correct solution. Rocker also supports measures to encourage and, where possible, require greater housing affordability to ensure that new development advances racial and economic justice in our community. We also want to make sure that design guidelines do not hamper the ability to build dense housing that remains affordable. Rocker is advocating to support nonprofit, community-focused, and mission-aligned developers in our area and encourage them to invest in housing in this Gateway area. And we want to make sure that there's not overly restrictive zoning guidelines that impact their ability to move forward with affordable housing. We also celebrate the plan's call to eliminate minimum parking mandates in the Gateway area and call on the city to extend that policy across the entire city area. The city should not be mandating private automobile storage at the expense of walkability and of robust public transportation. So again, we're really grateful for the time and attention given to this plan by the commission. We see the plan as a critical template for addressing the interlocking climate and housing crises in our community. And we believe that moving this process forward will help build a thriving and inclusive Arcata for generations to come. And on a personal note, for renters like me, the Gateway Area Plan gives me hope for the ability to stay and continue to invest in Arcata as my home. For both renters and longtime residents who are facing housing insecurity, a plan like this will help keep rents lower and provide the potential for home ownership so that we can stay and invest in a place that we love. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Additional callers, David?
Go ahead, Crystal.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Crystal Henson, and I purchased the Creamery District storage business during COVID around 2020, but it has existed in its current location at 9th between L and K since 1987. Apologies to Ryan for tuning in late to his presentation. But I do agree with the earlier with Patricia's earlier comments that he really does truly need to walk the streets of Arcata to gauge the character of the area. I purchased the Creamery District storage business with the understanding that it contained 42 storage containers on a half city block, and it also had a conditional use permit on file through the planning department for an open air flea market adjacent to Jolly Giant Creek that was put on the books in the mid-90s. And since I moved back to the area, it's been really difficult getting clarification on what is currently allowed and how I can potentially make improvements to my business the way it is, or any potential pivots to help, not only the local area in its, goals of economic feasibility, but, to help improve the overall, look and feel of the property. It was frustrating, coming into Arcata and hearing within a few months that Mayor Brett Watson hates your business type. And I feel like, systematically, the idea that mini storage is not a, credible business type is not, I guess, fair. But, on June 1st, I did try to approach, David Loya and Jen Dart with some alternative ideas, including a makerspace, potentially some micro housing, a few ideas just to kind of get the conversation going. And there has been no follow-up, from that in-person meeting that only Jen was present for. And it's just frustrating because I do feel like ultimately, the market should help determine the future of Arcata. And, I think that there should be a conversation on the idea of, micro housing in the area. I'm currently a board member of AHA, which is Affordable Housing, Homeless Housing Alternatives. Nezzy Wade, the president of that organization, has presented to Arcata.
Thank you
City
for your
Council.
comments, Crystal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker online.
Go ahead, Jane.
Good evening, Jane Woodward. I did not prepare comments for tonight because I had a lot to do, but I just want to comment that it's very important that you fix K Street as you discussed earlier and then make a determination about what to do about L Street. L Street is a wonderful opportunity to create a very special park area. I kind of think of like Central Park in New York, where you could have a community that would be highly desirable if you let it remain a park and develop it further as a park as was initially recommended in 2010. So that's one aspect. Then I want you to really significantly look at the feasibility, economic feasibility of building over 4 stories. And you really never did, as we recommended that you do, bring in contractors, economists, whatever it takes, developers, to talk to you about the economic viability of multi-story buildings over 4 stories, in particular, in a geological active area like we have, particularly in the coastal zone. So you have never undertaken that discussion. I think you need to have that discussion and get that expertise. You already heard, or we have already heard from Chris Dart, who basically said it's really not economically feasible. And I really think if you want to consider home ownership, then townhouses, which can go up to 3 stories easily, or even 4, would be a highly desirable way to meet the ownership, the desired ownership opportunities. Anyway, that's all I've got for tonight. I'll work on it some more another time. Thank you very much for all you're doing. And in particular, Judith, thank you very much for making the suggestion you made in terms of ensuring that our joint sessions are recorded and we have public comment. Thank you very much for coming back from vacation. I hope you had a wonderful one. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks for your comments. Are there more speakers online?
That's all we have.
Okay. Given that we've gotten through public comment, are we going to put up the proposed gateway code changes?
Yeah, we're getting that pulled up now.
Okay, and I just want to orient everyone that we have about 40 minutes left this evening. And so I want to just check in and get opinions and feedback from everyone on the commission as to whether we want to switch gears to discuss other considerations table, or simply forward it on as drafted and continue to discuss the form-based code.
If I could, since the commission hasn't had an opportunity to see the compiled list, do you want to pull that up, Dilo? And I'm going to ask Dilo to weigh in a little bit. She's studied it more than I have, since I haven't studied your responses at all since I've been on vacation. So I'm going to ask her to provide a brief synopsis of what has been presented here. It appears, though, that there's not a consensus amongst any of the prospective recommendations. And so these would require some way to vet through, those discussion points.
Yeah, if we can get that put up on the other monitors, Dylan.
Yep.
Sure.
Thanks, Devo.
Yeah, for sure. So I will zoom in just a second. I know it's very small, but just to follow up on what David said, we did ask the Planning Commission members to submit to us, what they still would like to discuss from some of these other considerations that we have had published for a while now. There were not any items where there was a majority of the commission, meaning 4 or more, that there was concurrence that this was something that needed to be discussed before forwarding a recommendation to the city council. There were a few areas where there were 3 commissioners who expressed an interest in discussing the item, but again, no majority votes. We got comments back from all commissioners except for the chair, who I understand was out of town prior to this meeting. So we did have some interest in further discussions of K&L, but again, not a majority. There were also some folks interested in discussing some of the ticketing and metering costs. I know that was something that came up. The metered parking, 3 commissioners were interested in that.
Sorry. Commissioner Mayer, can you use your mic? Sorry.
I was just asking if you could display that so the whole width is visible, which you could do by minimizing that F column.
Sure, yeah, it is a bit unwieldy. Thanks for the suggestion.
So, well, while Deal is adjusting this, so I guess the take-home message is that there are a couple of areas that, are standouts for, for potential further discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, given the timing that you have, the question is, do you want to focus on the outstanding gateway code issues, or do you want to move back into the gateway plan outstanding items here in order to complete your recommendation tonight for the city council, recognizing you'll be able to come back to these items at your next meetings?
Peter, yeah?
I'm interested. There was a suggestion about the width of K, or the lanes, the traffic lanes on K and L Street. And I did a number of, it seems like Matt and I both commented on that and supported, and did not concur with staff and supported us a narrower traffic lane. And I'm wondering if other people did. I didn't.
That's here. Good timing. That's right here on the screen. Lane width was one of the few items that there were 3 commissioners interested. I know that Commissioner Yodowitz indicated generally support of staff's recommendation, but open to further discussion. Those were the 3 commissioners that flagged that item.
I want us to make sure that right now we're not digging into this, but we're rather considering how we want to use the next portion of our meeting, as we're gonna, 2 things we know. One is we will make some recommendation to the Planning Commission this evening and City Council. Thank you, Dan. As a Planning Commission, we will make a recommendation to the City Council this evening, and we are scheduled to wrap our meeting up in about 35 minutes. So the question before us right now is, do we want to keep working on these issues, or roll over to discussions about the gateway code?
So
with the time we have left this evening.
Staff
Go ahead, Matt.
helpfully listed a couple of topics that they wanted like firm direction from us on before we made a recommendation. I think we should use the remaining time to get through as much of that as we can, and then we can save this for a future meeting.
Peter, are you seconding that vote? Dan? Third? Joel?
I agree.
Judith?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that when we do get around to considering our recommendation, that we should add an additional statement clarifying the extent to which this is indeed a work in progress, and that we can expect significant modifications in wording and policy on both the gateway and the general plan as they will review it. I think I submitted language to Dilo and David that we could incorporate in any of 3 places in that text, so.
Great, yeah, thanks, Judith. I think we all understand that we made a commitment as a planning commission to get everything we could done by this evening and to hand over a recommendation on the things that we had sufficiently covered to the city council, and that we intended from the beginning that after this evening we would have more work to do and we would continue to do that, and that would certainly include modifications, amendments, revisions. Part of that will be the 3 meetings that we're going to have with the city council, where we'll be able to get to discuss it and talk about these issues as a group. So given that, it sounds like there's clear consensus to talk about the Gateway Code and revisit this at a further meeting. So staff, can you steer us in that direction?
Yeah, so we're trying to open up we're having technical difficulties opening the updated discussion guide. So we're going to open the one from last meeting that has comments.
Yeah, I want to, if other commissioners are okay, I think we could just go through the topics in the packet as staff laid them out.
We can do that as well.
Is anyone opposed to that? Yeah, let's do that, David.
Okay. And some of these are just sort of a recap of our understanding of, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump to page 11 next, in your packet page 11. Some of these are really a, summary of our understanding of the decisions that have been made to date, that are going to be part of the recommendation. So these are just to, have confirmation from the Planning Commission. So the first one, and it was a topic of a lot of discussion over the months, but I think the Planning Commission came to a conclusion on ministerial permitting, recognizing that there may be some modifications and tweaks to the building sizes and which triggers each threshold, but in general, the Planning Commission is in support of the ministerial permitting or by right permitting that's proposed in the Gateway Code. Gradients of agreement.
Yeah.
Comment?
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, the ministerial permitting thresholds were adjusted a couple of times, but I'd like to strongly suggest that there be public notice for the application for a ministerial permit. And I think I submitted this in writing as well, so you've got some language there. That would alert the public that there may be a ministerial permit that would be considered through administrative means. It may not have a public hearing, but the city would still probably need to consult with agencies and other bodies to get their comments before approval, and the public certainly would be able to get access to that material even if there is no public hearing before a decision. So I'd like to request that we have a public notice at the time of an application for a ministerial permit, or at the time when staff decides to go ahead with review of that application. In other words, when the application is complete enough for staff to review.
Do any commissioners have concerns or comments about that
Judith,
proposal?
it seems to me that's contrary to the idea of a ministerial permit.
This is a public notice.
So if I could interject real quick, each of the different permit tiers has different public noticing for those that have a hearing either before the zoning administrator or the planning commission. There's a notice that follows the same procedures as our public notice for public hearings. And then for smaller projects that are over-the-counter ministerial, those receive a posting on site. It's similar to what we've done for design review in the past, where you're basically notifying everyone in your neighborhood, hey, look, I'm doing a project, and here's my, fluorescent pink notice of that project when they post it. So there's currently some, and what I'm hearing Commissioner Mayer say is let's bump the noticing requirement for that ministerial over-the-counter permit to match the permitting process for public hearings.
No, it's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
I understand that once the application is made, there'll be a piece of paper posted at the site. But beyond that, the application is basically, there's no way for the public to really find out about it. Even in cases where there may not be a public hearing, I think that there should be public notice of the application before any administrative decision is made, and that it go beyond simply posting a piece of paper at the site. It can use the same publication protocol and same publication sites as other public notices. It would not necessarily imply that there would be an additional public hearing above and beyond the thresholds that we've already got. It would make the process more transparent so that members of the public could also take a look to see whether they consider the application in line with the objective standards and be in a position to make their opinions known if they should believe an administrative decision is in error before having to appeal a fait accompli decision. I think that I think it would actually save the city money. It would help to avoid lawsuits, and it would help to avoid appeals that might not be necessary either.
Okay. Any commissioners share Commissioner Mayer's concerns about the process, Dan?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask staff a question. The noticing process being described here, is that like the 500-foot radius around the project? And would it somehow describe a project that's just being applied for, like there's a 3-story or 4-story building being applied for on this lot?
Yeah, that's exactly what the hearing notice, or that's exactly what the notice is intended to do, is when a project comes in, one of the first things we'll do once we've determined that the application is complete is notify people that we've got an application that's being considered for ministerial decision. There are 3 tiers for ministerial decision. One is administrative, what I referred to earlier as over-the-counter. That administrative decision is for the smallest type projects, and they are made along with the application for a building permit. That application would receive public notice by posting on site, which is historically what the city has used for design review applications. That's the only posting, only notice requirement for design review applications for years and years. The next tier is a zoning administrator hearing. The zoning administrator hearings are public hearings that are noticed hearings. And so a decision or a notice of decision at a zoning administrator hearing would also go out and let people know, and that would be either, depending on the number of people that it affected, either a radius mailing, as you suggested, 500 feet, mailing to owners and addresses, occupants. as well as potentially posting in the paper under legal notices for, appropriately sized projects. The third tier is planning commission hearing, and that would have the exact same noticing requirements as a zoning administrator hearing. So all of those get some form of notice at the beginning so that people can come and review the projects and see if they approve. And I think what I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood was Commissioner Mayer suggesting that the lowest tier, the administrative hearings, receive the same kind of notice as the other two. That there's a mailing and further public notice that goes out that way.
Joel?
I have a question, David. What does the current city code say about noticing of new construction?
Well, if it's a ministerial permit, there is no notice. So it's ministerial permits are, building permits, for instance. The building permit is black and white. There's no discretion to be applied to it. If you come in and you have a plan that shows that you're consistent with the building code, then we issue the permit. We don't say, no, we don't want to issue this permit. We don't like this project. The public doesn't get a chance to, come and comment on that. It's right, a property right to build on your property. Ministerial decisions are appealable. If we've issued a permit and it's been an error, then that decision can be appealed. We've recognized that in the Gateway Code. We've put a specific section for appeals in the code to be very explicit that while these decisions are ministerial, the public can review the decisions that are being made, whether they're being made at a public forum such as the Planning Commission meetings, or whether they're administratively decided, and they can come in and look at the plans and verify for themselves that they agree or disagree that it meets those codes. So yeah, they're all three tiers have the same sort of review process.
If I'm understanding you, the current city requirements for noticing building permit applications,
correct,
administrative ones, would be consistent with what the Gateway Code currently provides?
The Gateway Code ups the ante on ministerial decisions that are administrative. So typically, if you come in for a building permit, Joel, you're not going to get a notice to your neighbors. In the Gateway, if you come in for a building permit, it's subject to administrative decision, you're going to get a notice to neighbors. Part of the reason why we made the threshold for this notice low, where you just post on site to advise your nearest neighbors that that you have a project on your property, is because there are all kinds of ministerial decisions that are going to be such a small impact on a neighborhood. They're building a townhouse or building a new single family home, that kind of thing. It didn't seem to warrant that additional notice, the additional expense associated with the notice. But certainly that could be part of the recommendation of the city council, is to up the noticing requirements for ministerial permits. Actually, a single family house would it wouldn't fall under the ministerial category for administrative review. I'd have to double check that, because it's not providing the three community benefits, density and height.
Any other commissioners' concerns or questions about the change to noticing requirements? Okay, Judith?
I guess I would see that as a fairly minimal expense, and considering that some of the questions the projects that would come under ministerial review for the Gateway could be considerably larger or more complex than projects that would get ministerial permits outside of the Gateway. It seems like that additional expense would be well worth the city's or the applicant's while.
Thank you for that.
So that you're suggesting at the tier 1 to add the mailing, the 500-foot radius mailing? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and ideally publication where the legal notices are published as well, if they are applying for a ministerial permit in the Gateway.
Okay, well, we should take a vote here, and I would like to see a show of hands of who is in favor of changing the noticing guidelines for projects in the gateway per this discussion we're having. You're fine with changing noticing
I'm also
requirements?
fine with it.
I am. I would not be in favor of the publication in the paper because I think that's an additional expense, but I'm okay with the mailing.
And Judith, this is your proposal, so I'm assuming you're in favor. Okay, so this motion passes, or this proposal passes, rather.
Okay, the next item is around uses. In brief, the Gateway Area Plan doesn't regulate uses, and there are existing uses that would become non-conforming in the future, meaning that they're not technically allowed, they're in the area. And we wanted to be clear that those uses may continue. They can expand to limited, within reason based on the code. And those uses can continue under new ownership. And so the code is very flexible about existing non-conforming uses as well as future uses. Just wanted to be clear about that.
I guess I'm not understanding the question involved here because
We're just confirming this is part of the recommendation. Y'all are full support of broad uses.
100% support.
Okay, building heights, setbacks, and step backs. A lot in here, but basically the change that we heard, proposed change that we heard last time was to reduce the setback by at least 10 feet is what the statement was, so we'll have to refine on that. And to maintain the existing setbacks from interior and rear property lines that are proposed. And then to, the direction we're asking for here is to, for the commission to weigh in on the maximum building heights by zone, as well as minimum heights by zone for both base tier and tier 1 community benefits, and reaffirm the decisions you made over the course of the last several months.
We lost this language on the monitors. Just,
oh, okay. Can you pull that language?
Could we consider the height, the setbacks, and the step backs each in sequence rather than altogether?
Yeah, by all means.
Sorry to interrupt you, David.
So you want me to bring?
I think if we could show the language that we're looking at.
This particular piece is on packet page 12.
Okay.
This doesn't have suggested modifications that were submitted in the discussion guide. These are kind of leading us up to some of the big decisions that you've made over the last several months, and we're confirming a couple of decisions that you made recently.
Got it.
And so with this one, there was a proposed change in the setbacks on the frontages to reduce it by at least 10 feet so that the building developable area is slightly larger. Y'all decided to keep the step backs, retain the step backs, recognizing that as Ryan pointed out today, could affect either project feasibility or affordability on those upper floors. And you had a discussion about the base tier and tier 1 community benefits. And this is over the last several months that we've had conversations that have not yet been adopted into the changes in the code or into the gateway plan, but just reaffirming those decisions.
Okay. I agree we should probably take these sort of piece by piece. It's going to be too complicated to adopt them en masse. So perhaps we can discuss the first portion, which is the reducing the setback minimums. I think we had a pretty clear discussion about that. Is there anybody that wants to revisit that or change that decision? Judith?
Sorry, I missed that discussion. I watched part of it online, and then I fell asleep for the last part, so I apologize about that. I'm really concerned about the zero setback that was retained for side and interior boundaries. I believe that a zero setback on its own is potentially a recipe for some very bad design. The only situations in which I see that zero setback as your base standard that's going to work is if you have two adjacent buildings that are in effect designed together. Then you might have a street-facing wall of zero setback development that makes sense. Otherwise, you have hazards to adjacent landowners and occupants' privacy, and you potentially have fire and seismic hazards as well that neighbors might not have counted on. And I think that we should really revisit that zero setback standard for side and rear property boundaries and come up with something that both provides for good design and protects neighbors.
Can I ask a quick question? As we think about setbacks and stepbacks, would you not describe the Jacoby Storehouse as a building with zero setbacks or stepbacks?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And if I could make a process recommendation, part of the reason why we put all of the decisions that you made in your last meeting into the staff report is because the Gateway Code has not been updated. We haven't been updating this based on the decisions that you've made. And so we're trying to capture in this staff report the decisions that you made that we are planning to update into the code so that you can say, yes, make all of these changes. And we'll do that, by the end of July, so they'll be ready for your joint study sessions with the city council. If we go through these one by one, there's no way we're going to get through them by 8:30, and the majority vote on all of these has already been made. So I guess I would suggest a process switch up whereby if anyone has an issue that they want to raise around these, maybe get them out on the table real quick, because a potential off-ramp for you for the Gateway Code is to say, hey, look, we're not going to get the Gateway Code in this recommendation. We just don't have consensus to complete that task, and we're going to tell the council we'd rather have a few more weeks on the Gateway Code. If you feel like you've covered this material and you're comfortable with where it's at, and you still have a few outstanding items that you want to tell the council, hey, look, we're still pondering, step backs or whatever. But for the most part, this code we feel like is the working code that we want you to start thinking about. That would probably get us through this material a little quicker.
Go ahead, Dan.
I completely agree, and I feel like we all understand that we're still pondering everything in these decisions and recommendations that we're forwarding to the city council. So it's painful to me to think that we're going to go through each of these and actually stir up the old discussions.
Revisit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be here till midnight in a minute.
Yeah.
So if I could just orient to the rest of the staff report. So there's, going through packet page 15, the decisions that you made to change the code from your last couple meetings are summarized here. So if we didn't get anything right, or there's major heartburn, raise that issue now. The next section is starting on the bottom of packet page 15 is the general plan summary. At your last meeting, you went through these, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, you, based on the votes that you had at that time, which did not include Commissioner Mayer's votes, all of these, with the exception of the introduction, would go forward if Commissioner Mayer voted to have every element held back and not part of the recommendation. And so you have consensus already on those. So you can say, yes to items, around the gateway code, starting on packet page 11 through 15. Yes on general plan, starting on 15. And then in terms of the other considerations table, you have a couple of items where you have a, mixed vote. There's 3. All the rest of those basically have recommendations for moving forward. And in those cases, how can we have 3 split if Scott did? So with the rest of the items that have fewer than 3, that means fewer than a majority of you or fewer than a split of you wish to discuss those items again and basically concurring with staff. So you can make that part of your recommendation, holding out the ones that had the 3 split. If that makes sense as a process.
I think that that's a better way to go, because it still gives us an opportunity to discuss the areas where there's enough uncertainty that it would seem to warrant a discussion, but otherwise we can say yes to items we've already discussed and said yes to. How does everyone feel about that? Yes?
I totally agree. And weren't 2 of those 3 like metered parking and
Yeah,
stuff
so let's do that. Judith?
I'm really hoping that we consider the entire document a working document which can be changed and which can be responsive to comments and improvement. And I was not here for the meetings at which you made those decisions. I agree with some of them. I strongly disagree with other parts. I'm not going to say I agree with things I don't agree with. And I really want an opportunity to bring those issues up in the future.
Okay.
And we all agree that it's a working document.
Yeah, I think this provides that. So let's put a stop there and then move on to a discussion about forwarding our recommendation to the city council and looking at the language of what that motion would look like. I think the council understands that we are handing over recommendations as much as we've gotten through, that we will continue to work on it, they will continue to work on it, we will all continue to work on it together in our upcoming joint sessions. So I think everyone's on the same page there. The community clearly understands they will have opportunities for more comment and to see us separately, individually as bodies working through this. So I think we're just looking for a consensus that we're ready to make a decision on the things that we've already reviewed. Does everyone feel comfortable with that at this point? Dan, yes. Peter, Matt, Joel, Judith?
Not comfortable with it, but you have the numbers, it doesn't matter.
Okay, your vote matters, regardless of the numbers. So
I've provided a draft motion on packet page 10,
Right.
which, if I'm not mistaken, pretty much encapsulates what you've just discussed. And it further goes on to elaborate that a final decision will be, in order to really differentiate this recommendation from the final recommendation, which will be done by resolution, that the final recommendation will come forward along with the final EIR at a later date. And so those 4 bullet points on the first page are a motion that you could make.
And then there was this staff mentioned including voting to have chair represent the commission. Is that part of that same motion, or does that require a separate motion?
It doesn't require a separate motion, so yeah, you could incorporate that as well. Typically with these major milestones, an example would be you complete a year's work, you create an annual report, you adopt that annual report, and the chair provides that report to the city council. We're envisioning something similar now that you've completed this major milestone. You've your first meeting in July, as the council requested, are ready to make a major recommendation to them. that you convey that to the council by way of the Planning Commission chair.
Okay. Can we get a motion?
So move.
We have a
That
first.
we adopt the recommended motion of these 4 bullets by staff.
We have a first. Do we have a second?
And did you want to add to that to appoint the chair to deliver the message?
Sure, do we need to? You said we,
I think it would be appropriate to add it as part of the motion.
sure.
Okay, we have a first. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll-
We have a first. We have a second by Joel, Commissioner Yodowitz. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Whew.
Opposed?
No opposed.
Okay, thank you.
That was a big moment.
And congratulations.
Okay, I appreciate more than I can say everyone's work, all the public that have been a part of the process, online, in person, the letters we receive, the conversations on the street, the people who take time out of their lives to come here and share their thoughts with us every week, every meeting rather. It all matters. It's all important. I appreciate everyone's work on this. We're now moving on to correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members this evening?
Yes,
Dan?
I will miss the next meeting.
Thank you for that
25th.
notification. Any other correspondence or communications from planning commissioners? Not seeing any. Do we have any correspondence from staff this evening?
Just congratulations again. It's not the end, but it's a major milestone and everyone has worked really hard. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.